Now the stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about one incident, it was about a pattern of behavior. The officer stood frozen, his authority slipping further away as the crowd's questions grew bolder. What would happen next was anyone's guess, but the moment felt like it could explode at any second. The officer, now visibly cornered, raised his hand to silence the crowd, his voice trembling as he tried to regain control. "Enough," he said, but his tone lacked the authority it once had. The citizen, still calm but determined, stepped forward. "It's not enough," they replied, their voice clear. "You can't demand respect without giving it in return. We all deserve answers, just like you'd expect from us." The crowd fell silent, the tension thick as everyone waited for the officer's response. Just when it seemed like he might lash out, his shoulders slumped. He sighed deeply, the frustration melting into a look of reluctant acknowledgement. "Fine," he muttered. "You're right. I could have handled this better." The crowd's murmur of surprise was short-lived, though. As the officer began to explain himself, another squad car pulled up. A senior officer stepped out, observing the scene with a sharp gaze. "Looks like you've got some explaining to do," they said, addressing the first officer. Suddenly, the tables turned once more, leaving everyone questioning who truly had the upper hand. The senior officer's presence shifted the dynamic completely. The crowd watched as they calmly but firmly asked the first officer to step aside and explain what had happened. The citizens stood quietly, their jobs seemingly done, as the senior officer listened carefully. It was clear that accountability was now unavoidable. After a tense few moments, the senior officer turned to the citizen and the crowd, offering a brief but meaningful apology. "This isn't how we want our officers to conduct themselves. I appreciate you bringing this to light," they said. The first officer, now subdued, nodded silently, knowing there was no escaping this lesson. As the crowd began to disperse, the citizen walked away, their quiet stand leaving a powerful impression. It was a reminder that respect goes both ways, even in the face of authority. In the end, the moment wasn't just about holding one person accountable. It was about showing the value of standing firm for fairness. The scene was tense right from the start. A police officer stood firm, his voice steady but sharp, telling a man to leave the property immediately. The man, clearly frustrated, pleaded his case, claiming he had every right to be there. Onlookers held their breath, unsure of what might unfold next. The officer's patience seemed to wear thin as the man refused to back down, his determination raising questions about what he was hiding or protecting. But just as it seemed the situation might come to a close, something completely unexpected happened, leaving everyone, including the officer, stunned. What started as a simple order turned into a moment no one could have predicted. Stay tuned to find out what unfolded next in this gripping encounter. You won't want to miss it. As the man stood his ground, his eyes darted nervously, scanning the faces of the small crowd that had gathered. He seemed to be looking for someone, or perhaps hoping someone would speak up for him. The officer, keeping his composure, repeated his order firmly, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his expression. Why was this man so determined to stay? Then came the moment that made everyone uneasy. The man pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, his hands trembling slightly. "This," he said, his voice shaky yet resolute, "proves I'm supposed to be here." The officer took the paper, glancing at it briefly, but his reaction was unreadable. The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder with every second of silence. What could be on that paper? The officer finally looked up, his face serious. "Where did you get this?" he asked. And that's when things took a darker turn. The man hesitated, glancing down at his worn shoes as if trying to decide what to say next. "It doesn't matter where I got it," he finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer's eyes narrowed as he studied the man's expression, his grip tightening on the paper. Something about the way the man avoided eye contact made it clear he wasn't telling the whole truth. The crowd, now growing restless, exchanged glances, their curiosity turning into unease. A woman near the back stepped forward cautiously. "I've seen him here before," she said, her voice breaking the tense silence. "But I don't think he ever caused any trouble." The officer turned his attention to her, his face stern but listening. "Do you know why he's here?" he asked. Before she could answer, the man suddenly interrupted. "This isn't about them," he said, his voice louder now, almost desperate. "It's about what's inside that building." His words hung in the air, leaving everyone wondering what secrets the property might be hiding. The officer's gaze shifted to the building behind the man, its windows dark and uninviting. "What's inside?" he asked, his tone sharp. The man hesitated, clearly wrestling with whether to reveal the truth. The crowd, now captivated, leaned in closer, their curiosity outweighing their unease. The woman who had spoken earlier took another step forward, her eyes darting between the man and the officer. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man shook his head quickly. "No, it's not like that. It's complicated." His vague response only fueled the tension, and the officer's patience was clearly running thin. "Enough," the officer snapped. "If there's something in there I need to know about, you better tell me now." The man swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he said, "It's not about me. It's about who's waiting inside." Those words sent a ripple of shock through the crowd, leaving everyone frozen in place. The officer stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer to the man. "Who's inside?" he demanded, his tone colder now. The man looked down, avoiding the officer's gaze. "I can't say," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The tension was suffocating, the silence pressing down on the crowd as they waited for someone to break it. Before the officer could press further, the sound of a faint thud came from inside the building, making everyone jump. The man's head snapped up, his face pale. "They know we're out here," he said quickly, his words dripping with urgency. The officer's hand instinctively went to his radio, but the man grabbed his arm. "No," he said, panic in his voice. "You'll make it worse."